Love and Friendship by Jane Austen, Part 2. Letter 11th, Laura, in continuation. I have a relation in Scotland, said Sophia to me as we left London, who I am certain would not hesitate in receiving me. Shall I order the boy to drive there? Said I, but instantly recollecting myself, exclaimed, Alas, I fear it will be too long a journey for the horses. Unwilling, however, to act only from my own inadequate knowledge of the strength and abilities of horses, I consulted the postilion, who was entirely of my opinion concerning the affair. We therefore determined to change horses at the next town, and to travel post the remainder of the journey. When we arrived at the last inn we were to stop at, which was but a few miles from the house of Sophia's relation, unwilling to intrude our society on him unexpected and unthought of, we wrote a very elegant and well-penned note to him, containing an account of our destitute and melancholy situation, and of our intention to spend some months with him in Scotland. As soon as we had dispatched this letter, we immediately prepared to follow it in person, and were stepping into the carriage for that purpose, when our attention was attracted by the entrance of a coroneted coach and four into the inn-yard. A gentleman considerably advanced in years descended from it. At his first appearance, my sensibility was wonderfully affected, and ere I had gazed at him a second time, an instinctive sympathy whispered to my heart that he was my grandfather. Convinced that I could not be mistaken in my conjecture, I instantly sprang from the carriage I had just entered, and following the venerable stranger into the room he had been shown to, I threw myself on my knees before him, and besought him to acknowledge me as his grandchild. He started, and having attentively examined my features, raised me from the ground, and throwing his grandfatherly arms around my neck, exclaimed, Acknowledge thee? Yes, dear resemblance of my Lorena and Lorena's daughter, sweet image of my Claudia and my Claudia's mother, I do acknowledge thee as the daughter of one and the granddaughter of the other. While he was thus tenderly embracing me, Sophia, astonished at my precipitate departure, entered the room in search of me. No sooner had she caught the eye of the venerable peer, than he exclaimed with every mark of astonishment, Another granddaughter? Yes, yes, I see you are the daughter of my Lorena's eldest girl. Your resemblance to the beauteous Matilda sufficiently proclaims it. Oh, replied Sophia, when I first beheld you, the instinct of nature whispered me that we were in some degree related, but whether grandfathers or grandmothers I could not pretend to determine. He folded her in his arms, and whilst they were tenderly embracing, the door of the apartment opened, and a most beautiful young man appeared. On perceiving him, Lord Sinclair started, and retreating back a few paces, with uplifted hands said, Another grandchild? What an unexpected happiness is this, to discover in the space of 3 minutes as many of my descendants. This, I am certain, is Philander, the son of my Lorena's third girl, the amiable Bertha. There wants now but the presence of Gustavus to complete the union of my Lorena's grandchildren. And here he is, said a graceful youth, who that instant entered the room. Here is the Gustavus you desire to see. I am the son of Agatha, your Lorena's fourth and youngest daughter. I see you are indeed, replied Lord Sinclair. But tell me, continued he, looking fearfully towards the door, tell me, have I any other grandchildren in the house? None, my lord. Then I will provide for you all without further delay. Here are 4 banknotes of £50 each. Take them, and remember I have done the duty of a grandfather. He instantly left the room, and immediately afterwards the house. Adieu, Laura. Letter the 12th. Laura, in continuation. You may imagine how greatly we were surprised by the sudden departure of Lord Sinclair. Ignoble grandsire, exclaimed Sophia. Unworthy grandfather, said I, and instantly fainted in each other's arms. How long we remained in this situation I know not, but when we recovered we found ourselves alone, without either Gustavus, Philander, or the banknotes. As we were deploring our unhappy fate, the door of the apartment opened, and Macdonald was announced. He was Sophia's cousin. The haste with which he came to our relief so soon after the receipt of our note spoke so greatly in his favour that I hesitated not to pronounce him at first sight a tender and sympathetic friend. Alas, He little deserved the name, for though he told us that he was much concerned at our misfortunes, yet by his own account it appeared that the perusal of them had neither drawn from him a single sigh, nor induced him to bestow one curse on our vindictive stars. He told Sophia that his daughter depended on her returning with him to Macdonald Hall, and that as his cousin's friend he should be happy to see me there also. To Macdonald Hall therefore we went, and were received with great kindness by Janetta, the daughter of Macdonald, and the mistress of the mansion. Janetta was then only 15, naturally well disposed, endowed with a susceptible heart and a sympathetic disposition. She might, had these amiable qualities been properly encouraged, have been an ornament to human nature, but unfortunately her father possessed not a soul sufficiently exalted to admire so promising a disposition, and had endeavoured by every means on his power to prevent it increasing with her years. He had actually so far extinguished the natural noble sensibility of her heart, as to prevail on her to accept an offer from a young man of his recommendation. They were to be married in a few months, and Graham was in the house when we arrived. We soon saw through his character. He was just such a man as one might have expected to be the choice of Macdonald. They said he was sensible, well-informed and agreeable. We did not pretend to judge of such trifles, but as we were convinced he had no soul, that he had never read the Sorrows of Werther, and that his hair bore not the least resemblance to auburn, we were certain that Janetta could feel no affection for him, or at least that she ought to feel none. The very circumstance of his being her father's choice too was so much in his disfavour, that had he been deserving her in every other respect yet, that, of itself, ought to have been a sufficient reason in the eyes of Janetta for rejecting him. These considerations we were determined to represent to her in their proper light, and doubted not of meeting with the desired success from one naturally so well disposed, whose errors in the affair had only arisen from a want of proper confidence in her own opinion and a suitable contempt of her father's. We found her indeed all that our warmest wishes could have hoped for. We had no difficulty to convince her that it was impossible she could love Graham, or that it was her duty to disobey her father. The only thing at which she rather seemed to hesitate was our assertion that she must be attached to some other person. For some time she persevered in declaring that she knew no other young man for whom she had the smallest affection. But on explaining the impossibility of such a thing, she said that she believed she did like Captain McHenry better than any one she knew besides. This confession satisfied us, and after having enumerated the good qualities of McHenry, and assured her that she was violently in love with him, we desired to know whether he had in any wise declared his affection to her. So far from having ever declared it, I have no reason to imagine that he has ever felt any for me, said Janetta. But he certainly adores you, replied Sophia. There can be no doubt. The attachment must be reciprocal. Did he never gaze on you with admiration, tenderly press your hand, draw an involuntary tear, and leave the room abruptly? Never, replied she, that I remember. He has always left the room indeed when his visit has been ended, but has never gone away particularly abruptly, or without making a bow. Indeed, my love, said I, you must be mistaken, for it is absolutely impossible that he should ever have left you, but with confusion, despair, and precipitation. Consider but for a moment, Janetta, and you must be convinced how absurd it is to suppose that he could ever make a bow, or behave like any other person. Having settled this point to our satisfaction, the next we took into consideration was to determine in what manner we should inform McHenry of the favourable opinion Janetta entertained of him. We at length agreed to acquaint him with it by an anonymous letter, which Sophia drew up in the following manner. O happy lover of the beautiful Janetta! O amiable possessor of her heart, whose hand is destined to another! Why do you thus delay a confession of your attachment to the amiable object of it? Oh, consider that a few weeks will at once put an end to every flattering hope that you may now entertain, by uniting the unfortunate victim of her father's cruelty to the execrable and detested Graham. Alas! why do you thus so cruelly connive at the projected misery of her and of yourself, by delaying to communicate that scheme which had doubtless long possessed your imagination? A secret union will at once secure the felicity of both. The amiable McHenry, whose modesty, as he afterwards assured us, had been the only reason of his having so long concealed the violence of his affection for Janetta, on receiving this billet, flew on the wings of love to Macdonald Hall, and so powerfully pleaded his attachment to her who inspired it, that after a few more private interviews, Sophia and I experienced the satisfaction of seeing them depart for Gretna Green, which they chose for the celebration of their nuptials, in preference to any other place, although it was at a considerable distance from Macdonald Hall. Adieu, Laura. Letter the 13th. Laura in continuation. They had been gone nearly a couple of hours before either Macdonald or him had entertained any suspicion of the affair, and they might not even then have suspected it but for the following little accident. Sophia, happening one day to open a private drawer in Macdonald's library with one of her own keys, discovered that it was the place where he kept his papers of consequence, and amongst them some banknotes of considerable amount. This discovery she imparted to me, and having agreed together that it would be a proper treatment of so vile a wretch as Macdonald to deprive him of money, perhaps dishonestly gained, it was determined that the next time we should either of us happen to go that way, we would take one or more of the banknotes from the drawer. This well-meant plan we had often successfully put in execution, but alas, on the very day of Janetta's escape, as Sophia was majestically removing the 5th banknote from the drawer to her own purse, she was most impertinently interrupted in her employment by the entrance of Macdonald himself in a most abrupt and precipitate manner. Sophia, who, though naturally all winning sweetness, could, when occasions demanded it, call forth the dignity of her sex, instantly put on a most forbidding look, and darting an angry frown on the undaunted culprit, demanded in a haughty tone of voice wherefore her retirement was thus insolently broken in on. The unblushing Macdonald, without even endeavouring to exculpate himself from the crime he was charged with, meanly endeavoured to reproach Sophia with ignobly defrauding him of his money. The dignity of Sophia was wounded. "Wretch!" exclaimed she, hastily replacing the note in the drawer, "how darest thou to accuse me of an act of which the bare idea makes me blush?" The base wretch was still unconvinced, and continued to upbraid the justly offended Sophia in such opprobrious language, that at length he so provoked the gentle sweetness of her nature as to induce her to revenge herself on him by informing him of Janetta's elopement, and of the active part we had both taken in the affair. At this period of their quarrel I entered the library, and was, as you may imagine, equally offended as Sophia at the ill-grounded accusations of the malevolent and contemptible Macdonald. "Base miscreant," cried I, "how canst thou thus undauntedly endeavour to sully the spotless reputation of such bright excellence? Why dost thou not suspect my innocence as soon?" "Be satisfied, madam," replied he, "I do suspect it, and therefore must desire that you will both leave this house in less than half an hour." "We shall go willingly," answered Sophia. "Our hearts have long detested thee, and nothing but our friendship for thy daughter could have induced us to remain so long beneath thy roof." "Your friendship for my daughter has indeed been most powerfully exerted by throwing her into the arms of an unprincipled fortune hunter," replied he. "Yes," exclaimed I, "amidst every misfortune it will afford us some consolation to reflect that by this one act of friendship to Janetta we have amply discharged every obligation that we have received from her father." "It must indeed be a grateful reflection to your exalted minds," said he. As soon as we had packed up our wardrobe and valuables, we left Macdonald Hall, and after having walked about 1.5 miles, we sat down by the side of a clear limpid stream to refresh our exhausted limbs. The place was suited to meditation. A grove of full-grown elms sheltered us from the east, a bed of full-grown nettles from the west. Before us ran the murmuring brook, and behind us ran the turnpike road.